This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest Liverpool Blood Red podcast. I'm Connor Dunn, and I'll be your host today for the first time during lockdown, back in the hot seat since Guy Clark is away. I am joined by a full-time Liverpool correspondent, both home and away, mostly at home nowadays, Paul Gorst. How are you, Paul? You're on mute, Paul. It's not a good start.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, normally at home these days, but it wasn't today. It was only about 10 minutes ago when I got the nod to get on the pod. So here we are, a little change of scenery, seeing as we're going to be stuck in here for the foreseeable, trying to turn my spare room into an office. So we're midway through it. Give it a little bit of a go today and see how we go.
Good work. And I'm also joined by Dan Kay. Dan, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, Connor. Weather's not great and the general news isn't great either, but we're all looking forward to Liverpool getting back into action at the weekend and hopefully getting back to winning ways after that shocker at Villa Park last weekend.
Certainly so. At least one thing to look forward to in the midst of Liverpool lockdown. Hey, but that's for news to deal with and not sport, because we are full of Liverpool FC content and there's plenty to discuss, including internationals, a few Liverpool player bits, project big picture, PPV, and loanees, and maybe a bit of FSG 5-year anniversary, which is coming up at the end of this week. But we'll start, as it's international break, with a bit of news around the internationals. Jordan Henderson obviously came back, played for England last night. Shaqiri was back in action for Switzerland. Thiago also posted a selfie of a couple of pictures of himself on social media showing him walking around Liverpool. So he's out of quarantine. Mane is expected to follow out of quarantine this week, and it's looking a bit brighter for the Reds, isn't it, Gorsty?
It is, yeah. It was interesting to see Thiago, wasn't it, posting the... I mean, he didn't post any kind of back fit and healthy again kind of thing. It was just him walking down Seal Street, which is anyone who knows Liverpool city centre will know is a hotspot for somewhere to wet your whistle. But the fact that he's out and about and roaming the streets of Liverpool suggests that he's no longer in isolation, so will be fit for the Merseyside derby, which I think is a massive boost for Liverpool at this particular period. Which Liverpool got a little bit. Well, they had a little bit of an injury crisis, didn't they? Which was kind of swept under the carpet a little bit when you look at who wasn't available for Aston Villa: Jordan Henderson, Thiago, Alisson, Mane. 4 really key players for Liverpool. Okay, Thiago's only played 45 minutes, but he's going to be a massive player for Liverpool, isn't he? So good to hear that pretty much most of them are on the mend. We're still a little bit in the dark about Alisson, and we'll hopefully find out something a little on him later this week. But seems like the international break has kind of come at a good time for Liverpool as far as injuries go. Jordan Henderson was in action for England, wasn't he, against Belgium? I think Southgate and Klopp had a bit of an agreement about that to get him minutes. Trent Alexander-Arnold also played. So looking quite good on the injury front for Liverpool at the moment, with a massive game coming up on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, definitely. Just on Henderson there, Dan, really. I'll say a note about Alisson first, because I don't know if anybody spotted it. He posted a picture of himself on Saturday evening on Instagram. It's him sitting in his car. I think he has if I'm right, a foreign car. So it means he's sitting in the driver's seat and there's no strapping on it, either of his shoulders. And I looked at it and thought, looks okay. Obviously not going to be back for Everton, but I was hopeful. But anyway, just a bit about the positivity. Obviously, Henderson won that penalty for England last night, played 66 minutes, seems to be playing back into fitness. Another England game to come, obviously, and just seems to be that Klopp and Southgate have worked out a good plan for Henderson. And as Gorsty said, it's come at the right time.
Yeah, I think it's quite a rarity. Often we kind of feel, probably managers as well as fans, that international breaks get in the way sometimes and don't help on the injury front. Whereas in actual fact, having this training period and 3 games as it was, because there was a friendly game on against Wales on Thursday, wasn't it? And obviously another Nations League game against Denmark on Wednesday. It's actually given Henderson the chance to get some minutes under his belt. Chatting to a mate yesterday morning, he was saying, Henderson won't play tonight, will he? And I was like, well, I'd be surprised if he doesn't feature at least a bit tonight or on Wednesday, because Klopp will want him to get minutes in his legs. I only saw bits and bobs of the games, but by all accounts, he did reasonably well, won a penalty, which caused a bit of controversy with Roy Keane, as you might have seen on the Echo website earlier on. But he's such an important figure for Liverpool, isn't he? I think it's fair to say that, no matter how things went at Villa Park last week, if he'd been on the pitch, I don't think it would have been 7-2, because just that kind of the authority he has over the team, the way he marshals his troops. Liverpool certainly missed him on that occasion, and there's no better game for him to come back into, and probably no game Liverpool need him more in than a Merseyside derby, particularly if, as we would hope Thiago might be fit and gets to start alongside him. Bit of a baptism of fire for him to come into a derby like that, but if he's got someone like Henderson alongside him, that hopefully would give that little bit of reassurance and hopefully get Liverpool back on track.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we're obviously a week away and the game's not until Saturday, and we'll discuss this in more depth on Friday. But how are you feeling about the derby right now, Gorsty?
It's a strange one. I think it's almost like the perfect storm for Everton. Liverpool coming off a 7-2 high, the worst defeat for 50 years or whatever it was. Everton are riding high, 4 straight wins, top of the league, brand new impetus, a world-class manager, new players who seem to be gelling in perfectly. And they're going to Goodison Park, aren't they? I think the only thing missing from an Everton point of view would be the bear pit of 40,000 fans in there. So it's a difficult one for Liverpool. It's a really tricky one. They haven't lost a Merseyside. By the time Saturday morning comes around, it'll be 10 years to the day since they last lost the Merseyside derby. That could kind of become a bit of a subplot and a bit of an issue. So Liverpool are just going to have to show why they're champions. They're going to have to show up and pull up the bootstraps and really go there. And I think Danny Murphy used the phrase "wounded animal," didn't he? And I think that sums it up quite nicely, actually. I think this Liverpool team, if they got something about them, which they have, the mentality monsters and all that, the Jurgen Klopp is always keen to espouse. I think they're going to have to go there and say, right, lads, we're still a top team. We're still the top dogs in the city, and go out there and put in a huge performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately for fans, in a lovely segue, as everybody knows I love to do when I host, fans are going to be able to watch the game on TV because it's not behind a paywall. But one of the big news over the weekend was pay-per-view that is being brought in. And I'll come to you on this, Dan, because I don't know if people listen to this have read Dan's piece from Saturday, but he wrote a very, very hard-hitting and poignant comment piece about pay-per-view. And I'd just like you to share your views on it, really.
Well, it's it's another of these things, unfortunately, that makes modern football supporters feel that they're customers rather than supporters. Obviously, we all know football's going through a very, very difficult, unprecedented period because of the pandemic, of which, unfortunately, it seems at the moment there is no end in sight. Quite rightly, when football restarted after the lockdown in June, and for the first 4 match days of this season, all the games were televised. A handful on free-to-air channels. The vast majority of them, it should be remembered, on already paid subscription channels. So a lot of fans were already having to pay something to see them. But I think it was the right thing to do. It was the fair thing to do. There is an argument to say that, bearing in mind, clubs spent, I think it was 1.5 billion in the recent transfer market, and also spent over 200 million pounds on agents. There is a strong, in my view, a strong case to say that should have continued. But I could also see the argument on the other side that at some point, some kind of extra contribution was going to be needed, because obviously clubs are losing out on massive sums here. I think the figures per match day vary from £500,000 a game to £4 million a game for some of the bigger clubs, which obviously Liverpool fall into that category. Now, there's Spirit of Shankly, the Liverpool Supporters Union, pointed out in their statements over the weekend, right from the start of their expectations and their discussions with the various bodies, they always kind of felt that some contribution was likely, and in principle, a lot of fans wouldn't necessarily be against that. But when the news broke on Friday that it was going to be £14.95, that really got a lot of people's back up, and there's been a big backlash against it, understandably so, because Dave Kelly from the Everton fans group Blue Union pointed out £15 is pretty much exactly what the precise sum of food bank would give to one person in need at a time when people are worried about their jobs, their futures, their mortgages, how they're going to look after their kids. Football provides, at the best of times, let alone during a pandemic, football provides a blessed relief from the stresses and strains of everyday life, and it just feels like fans are getting gouged again. As I say, some kind of sum, isn't necessarily unreasonable, particularly if, say, a proportion of it went to clubs in the Football League, because they're not covered by the government. Have said they're going to financially support the teams in the 3 tiers of the National League, but not the Football League. And there is an expectation that Premier League clubs will do that. Now, if it was, say, I don't know, £7, maybe £10 tops, with 25-30% going to the Football League, I think some fans will get on board with that. But £14.95, £15 by any other name just feels like sheer greed. And that's why people are upset and angry. And, I think we can expect to hear plenty more about it. I believe that some of the local food bank groups, along with other food bank groups around the country, are in the process of launching a petition to get it for it to be rethought. I know that I've seen a couple of others sprung up over the weekend themselves, and I just hope the clubs get their heads together. Particularly, and this is obviously before this new stuff about, as I'm sure we're going to get onto, Connor, these proposals Liverpool, Man United are leaving for reworking the football system, and so this already happened before that. This emerged on Sunday. If clubs want to be taken seriously and have credibility in these very scary and changing times we're living in, they've got to get real and get their heads out their backsides and realise that we're all living in the real world. We all need to pull together and stop being so greedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't ever think it was a case that fans don't want to pay any money whatsoever, because they would normally obviously go to stadiums, and the experience of a match day and paying for a ticket and going to the game is totally different to sitting in your front room on your own watching TV. And £14.95, Gorsty, too much. What would you say?
Oh, far too much. I mean, I wouldn't even be. I'd be questioning if you want to pay a little fiver in there, which to most people is not an awful lot of money. I just think it's just rampant greed, isn't it? And it doesn't really seem to have an end. You hear a lot that they were taken aback by the backlash or whatever. But I just wonder what planet they're living on if they are taken aback by it, because planning to charge people £15 a game at a time when, so like Tottenham, for instance, Tottenham will get to refund their fans for their season tickets, so they pay for that.
Too.
Newcastle, yeah, and they're still waiting on that refund, and they're getting asked to pay £15 to watch, the Newcastle at home to, Burnley or whoever it may be. I mean, it's just ludicrous. I mean, pay-per-view boxing, that's been a model for as long as I can remember. But it used to be a thing. It used to be, Mike Tyson against, Lennox Lewis, and they were prize fights that you'd see once or twice a year. You can't be paying it to watch, I don't know. I mean, just any game really. It's just ludicrous when you think of how many games there's across the season. And I get the clubs need to kind of look at other avenues to help themselves. And Liverpool, this Liverpool podcast, Liverpool are losing £3 million per home game, and they need to kind of safeguard that in certain ways that they can. But I don't think asking the supporters to pay through the nose once again is the way forward. There has to be a better way. You hear a lot about optics these days, kind of how things look. And Arsenal on transfer deadline day spending £50 million on Thomas Partey and letting the fella who's played Gunnosaurus for nearly 30 years out the back door, made redundant.
Having sacked staff as well.
Yeah, after making 55 redundancies. Yeah. And this isn't to dig out Arsenal. It's just the way the whole of the Premier League seems to be run. It's like they just blindly can't see how certain decisions look to the working man and the people who have essentially funded the lifeblood of the game for years. And it's that saying, isn't it, football without fans is nothing. Well, it turns out football without fans is £14.95. It's too much. Something has got to give, and the book has to stop. And I'd love for people to turn off and just say, no, we're not paying it, and no one tune in. It'd be great. But we all know what it means to people, and some people will pay it, which is their right and their prerogative, of course. But at some point, something's got to give. It really has.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, it's interesting. You both kind of noted there that how Premier League clubs are run, and the other massive news from yesterday was this big project, Project Big Action, or whatever it's called, or Project Big Picture, should I say. So I've noted a few things down here that, because I didn't want to get anything wrong, because there's a whole raft of changes being proposed by Rick Parry, who Liverpool fans will know is Liverpool's former CEO. He's now the EFL chairman. So there's a huge swathe of changes which are actually being backed by Liverpool and backed by Man United. Parry apparently spoke to both clubs, and they are backing these plans. So essentially, the Premier League is going to hand out, under these plans, if they were to be put forward, a £250 million rescue package to the EFL, which we were talking about the government weren't going to do. But then, in turn, the League Cup, Community Shield would both be scrapped, and pretty much all power will be controlled by the Premier League's Big Six. The only way the League Cup would survive is if the teams competing in Europe didn't have to compete in the League Cup, which would automatically devalue the League Cup. And I want to touch on that point in a minute, because I think the League Cup, and especially in the last few years, has become such a vehicle for big teams like Liverpool to showcase their young talent, provide their young talent with first-team opportunities they're never, ever going to get. And I think that's a whole nother ball game there. But then, so the FA would get £100 million. So as well as a gift for this happening. But essentially what would happen is a one club, one vote principle, which we have now, which we've seen all through the pandemic, where every club gets the same vote and it's all worth the same amount. It would get scrapped. Premier League, it would then have to go to a threshold of 14 votes to pass, which is still, plenty. But then actually the 9 clubs who have been in the Premier League the longest would have the biggest say, which are the big 6, so-called Everton, Southampton and West Ham. And then, because under the plans as well, it's so confusing, but the Premier League would shrink to 18 teams. 2 would be relegated. Teams finishing 16th will go into Championship playoffs. So in essence, it would mean that 6 teams needed to vote for something for it to go through, which would be the Premier League's big 6. I just wanted to get your kind of thoughts on it all, Gorsty, and what you thought of this. Because obviously, on the one hand, there's going to be these big payments to the EFL and the FA, and getting the big clubs helping the smaller clubs through. But then on the other hand, it's just the big clubs massively taking control, and that is Liverpool included.
Yeah, it's a little bit more nuanced than the idea to charge fans $14.95 to watch a game. There's some things that are in there that are good and progressive and helpful, particularly the payments to the EFL. But then it's almost like the big clubs are looking to kind of profit from the chaos that the world currently finds itself in. I don't agree with that at all. I think if you're a member of the Premier League, you've earned that for a reason. You've fought hard to come up through the Championship. Just because Liverpool or Manchester United have been in there longer doesn't mean that they should have a bigger say. Just because they've got more fans and they've got more money and bigger stadiums, I think that is very opportunistic of the situation that everyone seems to find themselves in. And I'm not too sure that that's going to work. I think currently the way it does work with 14 teams having to kind of sign off on a big decision seems to be fine, doesn't it? Because we apparently live in a democracy, so that would mean that maybe 11 out of the 20 should kind of tip the balance, but they've kind of got it at 14, which seems to me like a nice middle ground. So the fact that it would be 6 teams of 9 making all the decisions and ruling the roost doesn't really sit right with me, because teams are in there for a reason. Just because you've had the misfortune of kind of being in the Championship at this point means that you shouldn't get a say when you're 20 years down the line and you've been in the Premier League for 8 of them or 10 of them. Doesn't really sit right with me, but there are some elements of Project Big Picture. Is the latest
picture,
yeah. But there are some elements of that I can kind of get on board with, certainly. But this idea that these 9 clubs ruling the roost isn't for me.
Same for you, Dan. What was your kind of feeling on that news when it was all breaking yesterday? Because obviously Liverpool themselves are massively behind these plans. Yeah,
and by all accounts, Liverpool and Manchester United are the 2 leading clubs driving this. And when I first heard about it, I did feel slightly uneasy about it, and I don't really understand the full dynamics of it. I've only read a couple of bits and bobs around it. I think Gorsty summed it up quite well. I think there are some good elements to it, and some more unpalatable elements to it. I don't think I think most people would agree that football needs some kind of change. Football does need to look into the future. Even before the pandemic, there were systematic problems within the game, fundamental problems within the game that need dealing with and addressing, and they've only been exacerbated by obviously what we're living through at the moment, and may well be for some time to come. I think the key element to it, and someone that's been very strong on this, and there's no one more acutely aware of the damage that big money can do to football than the Guardian journalist David Connor, who has written extensively about this subject for years and years and years, and he's made the point that the promise of, I think it's 25% of future TV receipts to go back into the Football League, that is historic, because in many ways the formation of the Premier League in 1992 was what kind of closed the door to when the Football League was launched in 1888. I think one of the fundamental principles of it was that money, such as it was then, would be shared throughout the game, and that remained in place until 1992 when that was tied up. Obviously, we know there's been parachute payments and so on. So that certainly is an encouraging, positive element to it, the kind of thing that the big clubs should be doing. However, as Gorsty pointed out, it almost seems like it comes at a price, and the price is the big clubs who, giving themselves a greater say and more power to call the shots. Some people are alluding to the fact that it might ultimately end up being one step closer to a Super League, a European Super League, which has been kind of like the bogeyman, the elephant in the room for decades now, and it hasn't happened. But obviously, we are living in changing times, and the inequality between the rich and the poor in the game, which obviously is mirrored in society. The Premier League has reflected that, I think, in the 20 to 30 years that it's been around. So anything that could be done to kind of try and mend that, or at least take the edge off it, should be welcomed. I think the important thing is this is an initial proposal. I would hope that there's enough common sense on all sides of the picture to sit down and talk about it and discuss it. This doesn't have to be the final version of it. There are some good parts of it, but I think there are also various other parts of it that people will take exception to, and that will need more thought and work going into it.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's something that could change football as we know it forever, but not in the immediate future. Now all the big news is out of the way. Let's give Liverpool fans, or Liverpool fans on social media at least, exactly what they want, and let's talk about some transfers. Now, not permanent transfers, but loans. The domestic transfer window is open until October the 16th, and there are a number of Liverpool players who could possibly leave this week, at least on loan. Harry Wilson being one of them, Paul Gorst. He obviously hasn't been included in Liverpool Champions League squad. He doesn't really want to be playing under 23s football until January at least. What do you reckon for him?
I think that there's only one option, and it's the one that Liverpool didn't want to take. Liverpool were adamant, him and Marco Grujic, earlier in the summer, that the time for loans was over for those two. It was time to either move on for permanent sums, or we'll give it a go in the team at some point and see how you get on. Now, obviously, Grujic, once Liverpool went out of the League Cup, that was probably it for Grujic and Wilson, really, until January at the earliest, when the FA Cup restarts. Didn't quite get the permanent move that they were after, so we went to Porto on the Tuesday, was it? The day after the transfer window. And it's looking likely that Monday, it's going to be the same. Yeah. So it's looking like it's going to be the same for Wilson. I mean, Burnley kind of stepped away from their discussions after I think Liverpool wanted too much money for him. But it doesn't serve Harry Wilson any good sitting in the under-23s until January. He's going to be clearly several levels above that, and I think it suits everyone for him to look for a loan move. And the most recent update I had on that was Liverpool were going to speak to him when he gets back from Wales and see what the lay of the land is. But I don't see any other outcome than him finding a short-term home for this season, whether that be in the Championship again. Well, I suppose it'll have to be in the Championship again. I mean, if he's available to Championship clubs, then there's going to be plenty of takers, because he's just come off a good season in the Premier League with Bournemouth, and he's a Liverpool player, he's a Wales international, so he's going to have his pick of the bunch, really. And when you've got that many after there, I mean, I can't really see any scenario where he stays put.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think there's a few others as well, Dan. Thinking the likes of Ben Woodburn, Nat Phillips, Sepp Vandenberg, Herbie Kane, Yasser Larouci, Liam Miller, all academy players, could be obviously at different stages of their career, but could be a few departures this week.
Yeah, and I think as Gorsty said, Liverpool are going to have to be kind of like quite pragmatic about things. In a perfect world, I'm sure, like with Wilson, they would have liked to have moved them on permanently, but because of the current climate, that's not been possible. And sometimes you've got to be agile and flexible in your approach. If you don't get exactly the situation you want, then you've got to look at the next best option. And I think certainly for quite a few of the lads you mentioned there, if they can get themselves to somewhere where they're at least going to play some regular football, that is going to do them more good than being stuck on the fringes of the Liverpool squad playing only the odd under-23 game here and there. We know because of the compressed nature of this season, Liverpool are going to need a slightly bigger squad than normal. But Klopp isn't going to want it to be too bloated. It's you want extra options, but if too many people are around kicking their heels, then that can become counterproductive. So, yeah, I think the key to this is being adaptable and hopefully being able to find suitable compromises with these players and with the clubs who are interested to get the best solution for all parties.
Yeah, definitely. There's a couple of obviously more interesting ones in that group set that I mentioned there, probably Gorsty. So Nat Phillips obviously flew back last year to come and play against Everton. He is a centre-back. He's playing in the Bundesliga last year, Bundesliga 2 last year. Liverpool obviously could do with a senior fourth-choice centre-back. He's got first-team experience, but probably one that's going to leave. And another one I'd like to talk about, probably Sepp Vandenberg, only 20, played against Tranmere and played well in the EFL Cup. I know that some EFL teams were there to watch him. And then Larouci as well. He's another one who Liverpool tried to sign a contract extension with, but he turned it down because he wanted to move, but hasn't got a permanent move away. So what's going to happen there?
Larouci is an interesting one. I thought he would have been long gone at this point because the news came out quite early on that he was looking to leave and he was looking to try and break into a first team somewhere. And we knew that
back in July, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, it was a while ago, and I think Leeds were interested at the time, and then his name was obviously brought up when Liverpool were looking at Jamal Lewis at Norwich. So it's interesting that he's still on the books. He's out of contract, isn't he? So Liverpool are in a bit of a tricky situation with him. It might just be a case of him leaving on loan, and then his contract's up, and he departs on a free transfer. And then you mentioned Nat Phillips. There was talk of Bristol City, was it, earlier in the window? I mean, at a time when Liverpool don't have too many centre-backs, he's a little bit older than Rhys Williams, who I think surprised everyone with his couple of games in the League Cup. He's a little bit older than Vandenberg. Billy Cometto is obviously someone they've got massive hopes for, but Phillips seems to be a little bit more experienced than any of those. So I wonder, would he be too much of a will he be worth keeping around just as a fourth-choice centre-back? And obviously that might not necessarily suit the player, but he might be needed. We know that Fabinho is an option at centre-back if absolutely needed, but I just wonder whether Nat Phillips could still be an option at Liverpool. I mean, I might be wrong, but there's not too many centre-backs floating around at Liverpool at the moment.
Yeah, certainly a couple to keep our eye on this week as we go forward anyway. And we obviously have all the updates on the Echo website before Friday's Blood Red podcast before Everton. One thing I want to touch on before we go as well, and again, another thing coming up on Friday, but such is the international break. It is FSG's anniversary. Been at the club 10 years on Friday. Just before we go, I just wanted to ask you both what you think FSG's best moment has been at Liverpool so far. I'll start with you, Dan. Put that on your toes.
Well, in terms of best moment, I mean, it's hard to look past, breaking that ceiling, ending that 30-year wait for the holy grail of another league title. It's been 3.5 years of almost like a dream. Certainly, when you think of some of the things we went through as fans over the last 20, 30 years. For me personally, though, if I was asked the one thing that maybe I'm not quite your question, but I'm going to slightly tweak it.
Free reign.
For me, the most important thing they've done, even more than bringing Jurgen Klopp to Anfield, was keeping us at Anfield, keeping us on that same patch of turf. I've said this for a long time. If that was all they ever did, to me, they would have my eternal gratitude, because it's more than just bricks and mortar, that place. It wouldn't have been the same at Stanley Park or Speak or wherever else. Klopp, the trophies, the goals, the memories are fantastic, and I've loved every minute of it. But for me, the best thing they've done is keep us at Anfield.
Yeah, fair enough. I think if I was to chip in there, I would say probably the best thing they did is kind of on the same line, is actually building the main stand. I just think it was a total game changer. Yeah. Linking back, obviously, to keeping it Anfield, but building that main stand probably changed everything for everyone at the club. It just made Liverpool bigger. It made Liverpool, more fans in the ground, just a bigger standing. It was such an investment and such a massive moment, I think, getting that completed. And obviously, there's still more work to be done at Anfield, but it's just such a huge first step almost to getting where we are today. But as I'm the host, I won't delve too much into it, and I'll let you have a go, Gorsty.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say the best thing of FSG have done is win the Champions League or win the Premier League, because there are so many various factors involved in that, and it's a sport and triumph. So I think what I'm going to go for is the fact that they were able to lure Jurgen Klopp to Anfield, because they were obviously the sporting issues, there are a lot more, factors that they're not able to influence. But I think going out there and seeing that Jurgen Klopp was available, and Mike Gordon speaking to Klopp's agents, and then Ian Ayre speaking to Klopp's agent, and then setting up the meeting in New York, they were aggressive with the pursuit of a top manager who has been the catalyst for what we've been able to witness over the last 5 years. So I think the infrastructure is important. Obviously, building the Anfield Road, they've got plans in place for that, and the main stand and the new training ground, the Kirby. That has put tangible value onto the bottom line of the club because of its extensions of buildings and so on. But I think just for what they were able to do is just to bring Jurgen Klopp to Liverpool. I'd probably hang their hat on that one.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, expect plenty of chatter about FSG this week, and probably a couple of special podcasts coming out around them as well, I imagine. But that's pretty much all from us this week, to be honest with you. I hope you've enjoyed this higgledy-piggledy big news, everything all thrown into one international podcast. We'll be back on Friday when the Premier League football at least, returns, and it's the big one against Everton. Thank you very much for listening.